Welcome to the Doyenne of Death Podcast, funeral planning for those who don't plan to die. It's all about end-of-life issues and getting the conversation started about our 100% mortality rate. This series is hosted by Gail Rubin, certified thanatologist and the Doyenne of Death. A doyenne is a woman who's considered senior in a group and knows a lot about a particular subject. So here to talk about the subjects we sometimes avoid is author, speaker, and the Doyenne of Death, Gail Rubin.
Welcome back to our conversation with Greg Bennick. He is a author of the book Reclaim the Moment, 7 Strategies to Build a Better Now. He's a keynote speaker on that topic. He's also the producer of a documentary called Flight from Death, The Quest for Immortality that came out in 2005. Greg, I am so enjoying our conversation.
Me too. This is great. You're cool.
So in your speaking as a keynoter, you help people focus. And we are so affected by distractions, as we talked about in the last section of our conversation. Would you say that the knowledge that we are all going to die is a major distraction that's rumbling under the platform of our lives?
Okay, there's 2 things there. Is it a major distraction? Is it rumbling under the platform? I don't think it's a major distraction because I think people are pretty happy with it rumbling under, operative word, under the platform. If it was rumbling over the platform, it would indeed be a major distraction. I think that people would be running in the streets, not sure what to do with themselves. It's a major distraction because a lot of the things we engage in are manifestations of it, but it indeed rumbles under the platform. If you were to walk into a dinner party and somebody was to say, "Hi, I'm Susan," and I say, "Hi, I'm Greg," and Susan says, "What do you do?" And I say, "You know what, before we get into that, let's talk about the fact that we're both going to die." Susan would run from the room, right? Susan wouldn't say, "Yeah, this is great. Let's talk about this." I think that,
I wouldn't. Yeah,
right. You wouldn't. When I met you, I said, "Let's talk about dying." I didn't even have to say that. I think we were talking about death and dying within 5 seconds or less. But yeah, most people are quite happy with it rumbling under the surface. So that said, when I'm speaking in keynotes about focus, one of the mechanisms I use is laughter in order to make sure that throughout my keynote, sure, there are ideas that are ideological. Sure, there's ideas that are very practical. And at the same time, there's things that happen throughout the keynote that are funny. And I make sure that happens because I think the people need all of those access points to talk through, think through, and navigate ideas that are meaningful. Laughter most definitely helps.
Well, and that's one of the approaches that I naturally gravitated towards as a death educator. The idea that laughing in the face of death, you can do that when it seems like death is a distant possibility. And that's the space that I want to be in, where we can openly and honestly talk about death and we can laugh about it. But once somebody is in the hospital or has died, it's pretty hard to laugh about it because now you have to deal with all of the arrangements that you didn't make because you were busy avoiding death leading up to this.
I mean, I agree. I think that the laughter serves as a way through. And I think that anybody who's experienced a loss of someone close to them certainly isn't going to be laughing that day, or they might not be. It would be surprising and interesting if they did. But I think that what happens is we eventually get through. If you've been through a breakup, or let's just take death out of the equation for a moment and just talk about it in terms of a breakup. You've been through a breakup. The first day, you're in total denial. The first week, you're in denial. The first couple, say, months, you're in this just swirling mess of what is even happening. And it takes a long time until you start breathing again. And that breathing is a way through. Just like laughter is a way through. If you can get to laughter, and for example, and I'm not prescribing this to anybody, but, during the moment of a breakup, when you're feeling alone, when you're feeling as though you're never going to encounter anybody again, if you can find it in yourself to laugh at how utterly ridiculous that concept is, I mean, that is just an intellectual construction that makes no sense, that you're never, ever, ever going to interact with another human being again in any meaningful, but that's what it feels like in the moment. And when we lose somebody, when somebody passes away, I think back to a very dear friend of mine who passed away in 2009. And when he died, I think that the thing that got me through eventually, and it started early on and then continued certainly over time, was laughing about how ridiculous he was as a person and how funny he was as a person. And I could tell you stories about him, and I'll name him. His name was Brian. I could tell you Brian stories that will make you laugh and that will uplift you. That's certainly a way through navigating the fact that my friend isn't alive anymore. I think that the idea of laughing in the face of situations that are challenging, and that doesn't mean like guffawing. It doesn't mean like breaking into uproarious laughter, but at least recognizing the ridiculousness of a situation or the challenge of a situation, how frustrating it is. And can we laugh about the fact that we're in this situation? It's a way through a double bind. The double bind for us, that we are, again, we mentioned it earlier, temporary creatures who fancy ourselves being eternal. That's ridiculous. That's utterly ridiculous. I think back to Neil Simon when he wrote The Odd Couple. I mean, this is going back 60, I don't even know how many years. When Neil Simon wrote The Odd Couple, somebody asked him, how is it that you write something that's so funny with these characters? And for those who don't know The Odd Couple, it was two divorced men who were sharing an apartment. One was very neat. One was very sloppy, I guess. And the comedy came from these two living in this apartment together, sharing an apartment as two divorced men. Somebody asked Neil Simon, how is it that you write something that's so funny? How do you get to the humor in this situation that's so, and what he said was, it's very easy. I create a situation where two characters who couldn't possibly get along are in a situation they can't possibly get out of. And then I just describe what happens. That's a double bind. Okay. That's a double bind. What happens when temporary creatures who aren't going to get out of the inevitability of our death exist in the world? Hopefully we get to laughter rather than aggression. Hopefully we get to laughter rather than sadness and despair as all consuming, because laughter is a way through.
Well, and you shared with me a paper by Dr. Neil Elgee on humor and death. And it's a 15-page paper with footnotes and citations. There was a line that I noticed that I had to write down that he wrote: we use humor to free ourselves from slavery to death.
Interesting.
Yeah, I just thought that was so powerful. And he quotes a lot of Woody Allen.
Well, interestingly, Neil Elgee was he was a medical doctor here in the Seattle area, an internal medical doctor, if I'm not mistaken. And he was fascinated by Ernest Becker's work. And he spent his life thinking about Becker's work and not spent his life writing books about Becker's work. I think one of the things Neil was most proud of was that paper. And that paper really hasn't gotten its due. It's like you said, it's a short paper. It's an academic paper. It's really interesting, though, because he dives into this idea of laughter as a way through the double bind. And as you first mentioned, Neil Elgee, now deceased by a few years, and Neil was a dear friend of mine, and I miss him, I started smiling. And I realized I started smiling because of an exact manifestation of what we were talking about a few minutes ago. You mentioned Neil. I miss my friend who is now departed. That is sad. I don't get to go out to lunches with him anymore. But when you mentioned his name, the first thing I thought of was how he would show up to these lunches wearing, these like almost like dark shades. And he always had driving gloves on, even though it was entirely unnecessary. And he was doing it because he just didn't care. He liked wearing shades and he liked wearing these driving gloves when we would drive around together. He was the coolest 90-year-old I ever met. And he was just so his own free-spirited person. That free-spiritedness is what I connected with and made me smile. That's a way through. So it speaks to that idea of laughter. And throughout his paper, that's what he's talking about, is how does laughter serve us as a navigational tool for the double bind? So here's to Neil Elgee. He was quite awesome, and I'm very happy that he was around for as long as he was, because he definitely shared that paper. I saw him deliver that paper multiple times. And when I say it hasn't gotten its due, it hasn't been published other than on the internet. And, he sent it out to people, wanted people to read it. But the idea is important. Given a complex situation, sometimes the best we can do is laugh about it. Or sometimes a thing we can do is laugh about the situation in order to help get us through.
Well, maybe we could make his paper available in the show notes for this conversation. That would be awesome.
I think that'd be great. I think that, at this point, Neil would most definitely love that paper to exist in the world. I think that it's an important thing for people to read, and important conceptually. He brings up a lot of people throughout the paper. Woody Allen aside, he brings up a lot of people in the paper, a lot of thinkers and a lot of important, idea creators throughout history. He's drawing on a number of sources. Neil was very proud of that paper for sure.
Well, and laughter is good for our health in general.
It is.
But also, for the concept of breaking down that resistance to talking about death. I have a license to use films in my talks. And when I put together the Before I Die Festival in New Mexico, we'll often have a mortality movie that speaks to whatever the theme of the day is, whether that's grief and aging, or burial versus cremation, and discussing death won't kill you. There are so many movies that offer laughter as part of this whole discussion of funerals and death. And I feel very strongly that, and there are studies that do show that people who watch a movie or a TV show are going to remember points from that visual audio input much more than just a speaker talking about these points.
It's true. It's true. Every presentation, every keynote I give is filled with visual imagery. And I don't just mean PowerPoint. I don't really ever use PowerPoint, but just things, props, interactive pieces that get people laughing and having a good time, because that's what they're going to be either remembering, or that's going to be the mechanism by which they remember the ideas.
So what else can we say about humor and death, laughter, laughing in the face of death? Can we really make a difference? Could we get more people to plan ahead? I think planning ahead is a good thing. Having lost my husband to medical complications after a TURP surgery for an enlarged prostate, within 3 weeks he was dead. And being the Doyenne of Death, and we had planned ahead already and prepaid, it certainly helped to deal with an unexpected death, having already done the funeral planning. But when I walked into that funeral home with my brother-in-law, and I have walked into hundreds of funeral homes in my career, this time it felt different when you're there to plan for someone you love. And I said, I don't know how people who don't plan ahead do this. How can they get through this on what is ostensibly the worst day of your life, when you're going to go plan a funeral for a loved one?
Well, I think one thing that's very important, and I say this, with compassion, for the experience that you've been through, is that we need, but we should and might recognize that laughter isn't a replacement for grieving. It doesn't mean that you walk into a situation that you don't know how to navigate and you just start laughing. That sounds like maybe that wouldn't be the right approach. And certainly that's not what we're saying, right? In talking about Neil Elgee's paper and laughing at death. We're not talking about literally laughing in the face of pain and therefore making it worse or pushing it to the side, but rather remembering that at some point there will be moments of laughter, and at some point there will be moments of lightheartedness. And that lightheartedness is a way through another double bind, which is, how do I go on? How do I go on having lost this person? That's a double bind, because I'm still here and I have to go on, but how do I go on? It's a double bind. So with that in mind, laughter is a mechanism. It's a tool that we can use to make our way through. It doesn't mean that we shove it to the forefront and, having lost someone, that we just start laughing about it. But it means that at some point there will be lightheartedness. And at some point you and I are going to be sitting down at a speaking conference, and we're going to be talking about people that we've lost, but how awesome they were, or how ridiculous they were, or this funny thing they did, or, oh my gosh, the next time you ... you should remember that so-and-so ... And then all of a sudden my life becomes transformed because the next time I'm in that situation, maybe I live differently. Maybe my life is enhanced because of the fun memory, the fun approach or perspective that you brought up. I think that that's a way to honor people who are lost, and it's a way to honor our own grieving process. I certainly think as well that anytime we mention the uplifting side of grieving or loss, meaning that there is in fact survival past it, it makes it easier for people to plan. And I'm not a planner as you've described, but I know that that's the focus of a lot of your listeners. So I think it's important to keep in mind that if we root ourselves in the weight and heaviness of what we're thinking about and talking about, we are not consciously going to easily come to a place where we embrace the idea, step into that situation, start that planning. But if we maintain a sense of just how utterly ridiculous the double bind is of our existence, then we might just get a little bit closer.
So, in closing, what a wonderful, wide-ranging conversation we've had. What thoughts about the denial of death, Ernest Becker, just this whole circus of life, would you like to leave us with?
Yeah, I think that, we talked about it earlier, but I think the idea that we are all harm-causing creatures, I've never quite worded it that way before, but we are indeed all harm-causing creatures. And in the midst of causing harm, how can we diminish the amount of harm we cause? I think is really important. I just got back from a trip to Thailand, where I made my way around Thailand, and I was interacting with people and animals constantly, and really thinking about compassion and where that lands, and thinking about generosity and where that lands, and realizing there's so much more room for all of us to grow into in terms of our compassion, in terms of our generosity, our kindness. That's something I actually speak about as well, is kindness. And there's a whole section of my book on it. How can we step more into kindness amidst a world and an existence which pushes us away from it? That, I think, is really the question. We don't have to solve the psychology of human beings in the span of some podcast episodes, which have been great and fun and meaningful. But I think that what we can do as a tangible takeaway is to think about kindness, and think about the way that we are bringing and manifesting kindness in the world, and the effect that has on others, and positively on us as well.
That is awesome. Greg Bennick, keynote speaker, author of the book Reclaim the Moment, 7 Strategies to Build a Better Now. And Greg, I am so happy that we got to connect at the National Speakers Association Thrive Conference here in Albuquerque. Your website is gregbennick.com.
GregBennick.com. We could probably put that on the screen or in the show notes for people. And if people are interested in finding out more about the book, certainly the book is going to be out August 20th, 2024. Wiley is the publisher. And you can find out more at Greg Bennick, GregBennick, in case somebody is listening rather than watching this, .com. And I'd always be happy to interact with anybody, whether through the website or through Instagram. My Instagram is the same as my name as well.
And hopefully at some point we'll get to read your biography of Ernest Becker.
Most definitely. Most definitely you will.
Oh, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's been great to talk to you.
And to my listeners, remember, talking about sex won't make you pregnant. Talking about funerals won't make you dead. Start a conversation today.
Thank you for joining us on the Doyenne of Death Podcast. You can find episodes of this podcast and past episodes of A Good Goodbye with Gail Rubin on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. For more information on Gail's work, visit agoodgoodbye.com.